I want to talk about humility as a quality, as one of what we sometimes call the divine virtues. If we study the Bhagavad Gita, if you've studied the Bhagavad Gita with me especially, we focus a lot on the chapter, I believe it's the 16th chapter. I'd be embarrassed if it's not. It's the chapter that lists what they call in the Gita the divine and demoniacal qualities. Let me just look in my trusty Gita that I have by my side here. Yes, chapter 16. That lists all of these qualities, and it's quite a long list. It's quite an impressive list, actually. And I love this chapter because it is such a practical one. There's other chapters in the Gita that talk about God and sacred energy and our relationship to God and service and our relationship to work and so many different things, and the way that the sacred relates to its material creation, to life itself. And then there's only 18 chapters in the Bhagavad Gita. And, towards the end, the 16th chapter, it lays down this chapter on the distinction between the divine and the demoniacal. And it gives this big list. And this is Krishna speaking, the way that this particular text works. So it says, the blessed Lord speaks and says, fearlessness, purity of being, perseverance in yoga and knowledge, giving, self-restraint and sacrifice, study of sacred texts, austerity and uprightness, non-violence, authenticity, absence of anger, renunciation, serenity, absence of calumny, compassion for all beings, freedom from desire, gentleness, modesty, absence of fickleness. It goes on. We're not done yet. Vigor, forgiveness, fortitude, purity, freedom from malice, freedom from pride. These are the endowment of those born to a divine destiny. And then it gives the other ones. Hypocrisy, arrogance, pride, anger, insolence, and ignorance. These are the endowment of those born to a demoniacal destiny. I feel like one of the big things that has been lost in translation in the in the postmodern, in the current yoga world, or in the world of studying spiritual teachings, definitely within the industry of spiritual teachers and influencers, especially us Western ones. One of the biggest things that is lost in translation is that there is a way of being which is at the heart of all of this. And the way of being, that list is a pretty great reflection. And one of the core qualities, if not the core of all of the qualities, is the quality of humility. Humility is our English word. There's different words for it in Sanskrit and Pali and the different languages that come from from Asia, the old sort of scriptural languages. Humility. And when it's not there, a huge thing is missed. A huge thing is missed. Like, kind of misses the whole boat level of mist. In our culture, and by our, what I mean is sometimes what we call the global north, the Western world, Western culture, which is also very much in Asia now. It's also in the East, so to speak. But a big part of our psychology is, you could say, I'm using the word pride, individuality. I did it. I can do it. I am great. And because there has been this big confluence, this big coming together of wisdom teachings, spiritual wisdom teachings, you could say, sadhana wisdom teachings, and psychology, psychotherapeutics. This has become one of the main focuses and one of the main aims for a lot of people on spiritual paths, or let's say that are involved in spiritual scenes or getting involved in spiritual practices, is like self-love, overcoming self-hatred. It's a big thing. Developing self-esteem, developing self-love, developing self-investment, right? Learning to put your oxygen mask on first before you help others. How many times have we heard that trope? And I think that that's good. And if you have worked with me, on any level, especially if you've worked with me in doing coaching or some kind of in-depth training, that is something that we just focus on so much, is uprooting ideas of self-hatred, uprooting, the ways that we feel crushed, and allowing ourselves to entertain an experience of bigness in our being and bigness in our life. I focus on it a lot, but I also see that, and I guess I take it for granted, because, my training happened in pretty traditional contexts, mostly. As far as the Indian wisdom teachings go, my teachers were Indian. And for the most part, my gurus were Indian. And the teachings came from these very traditional kind of cultural contexts. And before I got into yoga, my training was in 12-step program. And in 12-step program, humility is a huge thing, because most of us are coming into a 12-step program because we have failed. We're coming into a 12-step program in a state of powerlessness. That's the first step. So I take it for granted, but I shouldn't, because all of these Eastern teachings are based on this basic fundamental humility. It's a cultural thing. in India, in China, in Japan, in Southeast Asia, in places like Nepal and Burma and Tibet, and these places where the origin of these teachings come from. Culturally, the same way that in, say, United States, we have this thing of like rugged individualism, right? I can do it. I'll be a hero. I can, I'm going to be the strongest. I'm going to be the richest. I'm going to be the smartest. I'm going to be the, right? I'm going to be the leader, and everybody else is going to be under me. Let me see how high I can rise. Even we have these expressions like the glass ceiling, because we can only rise so far. But the idea is always to rise and rise and rise. Whereas in Asia, the same way that individualism is so much a part of our American ideal, communalism is a part of Asian culture. In Japanese, there's this word wa, which means like communal harmony. And it's one of the highest, most prized energies. Wa. And in India also, there is this notion of dharma in which everything kind of flows together and everything has its part that it plays. In Chinese, there's the idea of the Tao, of this nature that holds and sustains all of what in Taoism we call the 10,000 things, like all of the things, they all have their place within this greater thing. But that there's always something greater. In, Western philosophy and in American, that kind of, and I'm talking in exaggerated ways. I hope you understand that. And I'm talking in generalizations for the sake of making the point. But yeah, here we have, God is great and manifest destiny and these ideas that like God is, put humans on the earth to have dominion over all the animals and God is there to like strengthen me so that I can be on top of everyone is kind of the thing. It's not like that in the East where the teachings come from. So fine, if we don't want to follow Eastern teachings, then cool. But so many of us are trying to follow Eastern teachings. And when we don't have humility right there in the beginning, from my point of view, we're on a track that's going in a different direction than what the teachings were intending us for. If someone is a teacher in India, a master, and this goes for spiritual masters, but it also goes for other kinds of traditional masters like, a sitar master, a tabla master, like a master of some traditional art. There's always this intense reverence for one's own master and for other masters. And again, this deferential humility. If you go to a classical Indian recital, it doesn't matter how big, quote unquote, how great, quote unquote, how famous that maestro is, and in many cases they are just phenomenally outstanding, deeply steeped artists, deeply skilled. They start off by acknowledging their teachers. It doesn't matter. It can be an 80-year-old, tabla player. I don't know. The tabla players keep playing when they're 80, but definitely, I'm thinking of like Ravi Shankar, the sitar maestro. They honor their gurus, and then if there are other maestros that are in the audience, which is oftentimes the case, they will honor all of them All of the other like master musicians that are in the room, they will honor them before they play. And then when they play, it's like with this attitude of, my master was great. The person who taught me this is great. And the person who composed this thing that I'm going to explore, this piece of music, they were also great. And this raga that we're going to use, this raga is great. And the instruments are all sacred, and they're held with a certain degree of honor. And whoever they're playing with is also honored. And then they'll begin the piece with that attitude. And then when they're praised, they will deflect. Oh, thank you. I'm just a humble, expressionist of this piece. If I ever teach in India, it's weird if I do it in the West. People they don't understand humility as much. But if I teach in India, there's always a required thing at the beginning where I just give a disclaimer. And it's like, okay, I'm going to give a talk in the Bhagavad Gita, but I just have to let you know, I am just a baby. I'm just going to teach you like the smallest thing that I've learned from my experience. I'm not trying to put myself on any kind of a pedestal here. I'm not trying to say that I know this. I'm just humbly, I'm a servant of this, and please allow me to share something with you. And forgive me in advance if I make any mistakes. This kind of attitude is the attitude that is at the foundation. And it's a difficult thing to learn, but it's very important. I want to share with you this text that I'm just learning really for the first time. It's beautiful. It's called the Shikshastakam. And it's a prayer that was written or uttered by this 15th century master called Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And in it, he is extolling the power of chanting, of singing the different names of God. And in his case, Krishna is the Ishta Devata of his lineage. And he comes in and out in the language of, it's him speaking, and then he also becomes Radha, which is like, if you know the tradition, Radha is Krishna's beloved. So speaking from that point of view. And this is written in Sanskrit. This is my translation of it. So again, forgive me if you're hearing this and this is something that is a sacred text to you. Please don't be offended if I don't translate it the way that your teachers have translated it. So I'll do one of those little disclaimers. It says, supreme victory to the chanting of the name of Sri Krishna. The mirror of our consciousness is cleaned, and the great fire of worldly existence is extinguished. Sacred goodness blossoms like the white lotus in the moonlight. It is the very life, like a young wife, of wisdom. The ocean of bliss expands. At every step, we taste the nectar of perfection. Every soul is bathed. Supreme victory to the chanting of Sri Krishna's name. All of his powers dwell in the various forms of his name. And there are no rules about time given in this remembrance. Even with so much of your grace, my Lord, I was born with the misfortune of having no attachment to this. And then here is the humility. I mean, it's already, the energy is there, but then this verse. Being lower than the grass we walk upon, more tolerant than a tree, with humility, respecting all. The name of Hari should always be chanted. Lord of the universe, I don't desire riches or followers or beautiful women or poetry in birth after birth, Lord. Let it be so that I offer causeless, unmotivated devotion to you. O son of Nanda, I, your servant, have fallen into the horrible ocean of suffering. Please consider me as a particle of dust beneath your feet. When will it happen? And this is, written by the greatest master of this tradition. But he's like talking about his own separation and his own despondency. And he says, when will it happen that tears flow from my eyes? When will it happen that I'm unable to speak, that my hair stands up on end when I chant your name? When will that happen? He says, Govinda, in separation with you, the shortest moment feels like a whole age. Tears flow from my eyes like heavy rain. The whole universe appears empty. And then this last verse, he says, let him embrace me or trample me or break my heart by hiding himself completely as I fall at his feet. Let him do whatever he wants. The slut. It actually says that. Let him do whatever he wants, the slut. Still he and no one else is the only Lord of my prana, of my very life force. I just love this because it just oozes this kind of humility, and even like over the top humility. And we're going to talk about the shadow side of humility in a second, guys. So stay with me here. But it's like this kind of a bhava, this kind of an attitude is at the heart of the spiritual teachings. It's not, I am so great at yoga. It is, yoga is so great. And the deeper I go into it, the more I realize how great it is and how much I have to learn. The thing is, today, because so many of these wisdom teachings come within an industry, a very competitive industry, that relies on every one of us spiritual teachers now becoming a social media influencer. It's outrageous. And so then we have all of these people, young people that are relatively new to the path. They can't go on Instagram and talk about how ignorant they are. They can't go on social media and talk about that, their humility. They can never utter a prayer like that. Unless they were topless or something, They have to act like, well, I know I'm a shaman. I'm a healer. I'm a trainer. I'm a way shower. And I'm not even talking about inauthentic teachings or like fake teachers, or I'm not even talking about the effect of it for the world or for the world of spiritual teaching. But for those people They get robbed of this. They get robbed of discipleship. They get robbed of this thing of like, I don't get it. I have this misfortune. I'm not even that attached to chanting. I consider me to be a particle of dust at your feet. I myself am like fallen into this ocean of suffering. I'm broken. Help me. They get robbed of that. We get robbed of that when we become influencers, when we become famous, when we become, like the people that have to give the answers and have the answers. As opposed to, okay, I had this experience, a spiritual experience, whether it's a yoga experience, a meditation experience, a plant medicine experience, or whatever it is that like cracked me open. And now I'm going to start something that 30 years from now, I'll be able to really like share about with some authority 30 years from now. No, it's like I went to Peru and now I'm home and I'm changing my job and now I'm a shaman. So yeah, it waters down our world of spiritual teachings. Yes. We can talk about that another time. But for that person wouldn't have gone to the Peru to begin with. They wouldn't have gone to the meditation intensive or whatever the thing was if they weren't a sincere seeker. But then they get robbed of those 30 years of being the dust underneath the feet of God, of being, a disciple. You get robbed of that. And the humility is such an important element. All teachers should have a teacher. I think that in today's climate, in today's age, all significant teachers and healers should have a therapist. I mean, we should all have teachers above us that, we can check in with and get supervision from and get reflections from. But I think that we should all have therapists. I really do. And it's because of this. And it goes both ways. It both goes into what we're offering, but it also goes to, our experience within it. Now, it doesn't mean like to just act humble, because that's one of the shadow aspects of it, is that in some spiritual communities where they do still talk about humility and they do still talk about ego. We don't talk about ego. That's the issue. We don't talk about ego, go. We don't talk about ego. We don't. It used to be the ego is the main topic. We don't talk about it anymore. But in some communities where they still talk about ego, then people will take on this facade of humility because it's not culturally cool to be egoic. And so then people will talk in this voice and they'll act out this whole thing of humility. And it's this kind of like act, which quite frankly, I think oftentimes is an improvement over what we see, at Bhakti Fest or something, But it's fake and it's a shadow thing. The other side of it, and this is so important to say, humility is not low self-esteem. Humility is not self-hatred. And humility is not codependency. This is why we have so many teachings about self-esteem, about, healthy inflation, like getting ourselves, built up again. Because there is so much codependency, there is so much self-hatred, there is so much low self-esteem. That's not what humility is. Humility is actually tremendous self-esteem, because you're happy to be in that place, legitimately happy to be low, to be small. as opposed to being there because you just feel like you're no good. Or you're in this codependency thing where, yeah, you're always putting yourself second. You're always putting yourself last. You're never thinking about yourself. But that's not because you've cultivated humility. It's because you're codependent. It's actually a very self-absorbed state to be in a certain way, even though, it appears and acts like there's no self. Humility is not that. Here's what humility is, and this is a very simple way to look at it, and maybe it's even too simple. Maybe it's simplistic. Humility is what happens when we are in the presence of greatness. When we're in the presence of magnificence, and there's a scale, there's a scope. The greater the magnificence, in a way, the smaller we feel. Not, again, in a low self-esteem, codependent, or self-hating way. Have you experienced childbirth? I mean, somebody else's. If you witnessed someone giving birth. Even witnessed an animal giving birth. Or witnessed some natural marvel. Or had that experience where, all of a sudden you're up in a plane and you see everything all at once. Or you're in the Grand Canyon, or you're someplace where all of a sudden you feel so small, or you lie beneath a sky full of stars. Or you witness an act, a human act, that is so magnificent that it gives you that heart-melting, tender experience. That's humility. In the sacred world, in the world of spiritual teachings, that natural experience of humility happens when we're in the presence of God. Goddess, Holy Spirit, Great Spirit, whatever you call it. Well, maybe not whatever you call it, because maybe you call it something totally whatever. But when we're in the presence of the divine, then humility is there automatically. So it becomes a practice. An upaya is the word for practice, which means remedy. And this is where, it's a fine line between the fake, humility that you'll see in spiritual communities, that way of acting, and just practicing humility. Because you can practice it. Sometimes you have to remind yourself that you're in the presence of greatness. And those experiences that I shared before is not what I'm talking about. Those are peak experiences. Those are experiences that, for most normal people only happen a few times in their life. For the mystic, one, we learn how to have regular peak experiences. That's what the deep meditation practice is for. That's what the chanting practice is for. That's what, they're talking about in Shikshastakam in terms of the way that we work with practice. So as a mystic, we have that regular peak experience. But then also, as a mystic, what's happening with our consciousness, and in a way, this is how I define progress on the spiritual path, is that pretty soon, more and more things are revealing themselves as magnificent. We just have to look. We just have to feel our pulse and consider our cardiovascular system. We just have to feel our breath and consider the process of oxygenation of our blood. Just think about our nervous system. You have some stupid thought, some stupid song is stuck in your head. But if you really marvel at that system that can remember things and remember lyrics and songs and memories and like movies, and then can invent new ones, how can we not bow before that magnificence? Only if we're not paying attention, and only if we're stuck in that other thing. So it happens when we're in the presence of that, but then also, and this is what I'm saying, it's in Upaya, we put ourselves in the presence of magnificence by being that way. By taking even a situation, a hardship in our life or some kind of a situation that is causing us suffering, and instead of blaming other people and feeling like a victim, all of a sudden we say, I teach me. What are you here to teach me, hardship? What are you here to teach me, pain? I am a student. Difficult person, impossible person. You are my guru. What are you here to teach me? Then suddenly, or not so suddenly, these things from life that just feel like bad karma, or even thinking of things as karma puts you in a space of humility. Because it's like, okay, this situation is not fair. I'm being mistreated. I'm going to act like a Kevin. Let me talk to your supervisor. This is unacceptable. But then you think, okay, in this situation, something is not right. But here I am. Maybe I've brought this on myself. Maybe there's a karma here. Maybe this person who's giving me this atrocious customer service right now, if you want to get really woo-woo about it, like maybe in a past life, I mistreated this person. Whatever. Or I mistreated someone, and now here I am. Let me humbly accept this and see if I can learn from it and see if I can act better in this moment. And again, I just always have to say, when we're talking to Westerners, and also sometimes to act better in that moment is to ask to talk to the supervisor and take action to remedy something on the outside that needs to be remedied. Sometimes that is the case. But do you understand what I'm saying? That really humility, this could be titled a talk about discipleship. Because we're putting ourselves as disciples. It's like, how can I learn and how can I serve? Let me be smaller here. I'm not the boss here. Even if my role is being the boss, I'm not the boss. I'm very clear with my kids that they are my kids and I'm their dad and I'm in charge of them. But I am serving something greater, taking care of them. They don't belong to me. They belong to that. And that is my boss. That is the one that I serve in taking care of them. That is so important when I'm in that situation. Or just to think of the kids. And yeah, right now they're 10 years old and 7 years old in their bodies, and I'm 50 years old. But who knows how old our souls are? They could be much older than me, much wiser than me, much greater than me. They probably are. Yes. There's this thing of surrender. And this is a Sanskrit word. I think it's Sanskrit. It might be Hindi. I'm not sure. But it's samarpana. Samarpana. There's a great album of spiritual music from the 70s called Samarpana. Came from India. Samarpana can be translated as sweet surrender. And what it is Samarpana is that moment of giving up. It's that moment of, I can't do this. Lord, you do this. And it happens just in life. It happens when we lose, right? It happens when a relationship ends. It happens when we have, we need to give up on something. And it oftentimes is accompanied by a tremendous amount of pain and grief. But if we can get into it from this angle of humility, then it becomes a practice that we can do on our own. We can just start there. Before we even start the endeavor, we give up. And then from that place, we go forward and do it. Samarpana. There's this quote of Rumi through Coleman Barks that says, there is a kind of poverty that is pure gain. There's a kind of poverty that is pure gain. I like to think of it like this. A radio station that you're tuning. You're trying to tune to. But you're driving in a car. You've had this experience, probably. And you're listening to the song, and it's great, and then you go out of range, and it starts to get staticky. But the song's not over with, and you don't want to stop listening to it, so you're okay listening to it with a little bit of static. But then as you go further and further, it gets more and more staticky. Until finally you just lose the station altogether. If you keep moving, eventually you'll get in range of another station, and you could tune in again. But in that is a lot of our suffering. And what that next station is, in the example of relationships, a relationship starts and it's very clear, loud and clear. And then over time, we have to keep tuning it. We have to keep tuning into it. But in some cases, our soul is just moving through, and that relationship is not meant to last forever. And it starts to get staticky, and we're with it. And pretty soon, it's mostly static. And then we don't want to give up on that song because we love it. And then pretty soon, it's just all static. And then the next clarity is not the next relationship. The next clarity is the clarity of, okay, this is done. This is done, and I'm moving on. And I love them, and it's over. Clarity, moving on. But in between there's that, it's that pain of holding on. Humility is when we say, okay. And we tune into the full letting go. This is a topic that there could be books and books and books on. And I think that is enough for now in terms of the talk. But let's just do one little contemplation together. If you want to close your eyes. And you can take some conscious breaths in and out through your nose. And find that miracle, whatever it is. Get yourself in front of a miracle right now, though. Get yourself in front of a miracle. It might just be the miracle of your breath, or the fact that you have such good hearing. A lot of people don't have such good hearing. Some people are completely hearing impaired. or if it's the miracle of your cardiovascular system. You can feel your pulse and just imagine this tireless effort that your heart's been doing since you were a fetus. Your heart has been beating. And for most of us, it's never stopped. For those of you that your heart has stopped and you're still here, that was one of the most significant moments of your life. Otherwise, it's going to beat until the day that we leave our body. 120,000 times a day, something like that. And in getting yourself in front of a miracle, already you can start to find that feeling of happy smallness, of smallness and wisdom. And in the presence of that, in that space of humility, take whatever is your biggest challenge right now in your life. Whatever is your biggest challenge right now, whatever it is, a money thing, a relational thing, a health thing, a world event thing, whatever the biggest challenge is, and put yourself down. Make yourself low. Get your head on the floor, so to speak. And ask, what are you here to teach me? Sadhguru, in the form of this difficulty, O great master, O Sadhguru, Guru Deva, what do you want to teach me here? And just see if an answer comes. If it doesn't come, it doesn't mean that there's no answer to the question. Very good. And you can do this longer in your journal if you want to. In fact, please do this in your journal for longer. This is a wonderful kind of dialogue that you can get into in private in your journal. And whatever the answer is, I also just want to say, you don't have to do it alone. None of this was meant to be done alone. All of this spiritual teaching stuff, especially any of the deep stuff, is meant to be done as a student of a teacher, of someone who has walked that path. Not on a pedestal. We've had enough of the pedestal guys and ladies. It's not about teachers on pedestals, but it's just teachers who have traversed the land that you're trying to learn to traverse. And have that support in your life, like people that you're actually working with and talking to and getting coached by and attending their things. And it could be mine, but there's so many good teachers and lots of mediocre teachers and bad teachers. I'm sure you could find something. A few excellent teachers. And then also, don't try to do this without taking support from the ancients. The masters that have come before us have left incredible, impeccable teachings behind. From my point of view, again, I'm very traditional. That's the role of the teacher in your life. The role of the teacher in your life is to be a channel and an interpreter of those old teachings that came from their teachers and their teachers and their teachers' teachers and their teachers' 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 teachers. And it also, there's nothing wrong with you having students too. If you know some of this, if you've attained something, it's not just talk, but it's also walk, then that's a good way also to stay humble, is when you're working with people and you're seeing the miracles that are happening in their lives.